Ever since the U.S. carried out strikes against Venezuela and captured its president on Saturday, there's been intense discussion in the media about how this could set a precedent or playbook for other countries to carry out similar actions. Many are specifically pointing to Taiwan and China as an area of concern. Do you share these concerns?
When people draw analogies with Beijing's desire to take over Taiwan, I do find myself strongly disagreeing. I think that China really isn't likely to fundamentally alter its strategy toward Taiwan as a result of US attacks on Venezuela or Russia's invasion of Ukraine, for that matter. Certainly, Beijing won't just dispatch special forces to kidnap President Lai Ching-te. That will not advance China's goal of reunification. And I think that Beijing hasn't been waiting for the United States to get distracted elsewhere so that it can seize Taiwan by force. In my view, Xi Jinping's strategy toward Taiwan has its own logic. It really isn't likely to be heavily influenced by developments elsewhere.
What about U.S. reputation? There are some countries, including China, who feel that U.S. operations against Venezuela over the weekend violate international norms, if not laws. Does this harm U.S. credibility when they push back against Beijing, when Beijing takes aggressive action, say, in the South China Sea or around Taiwan?
Well, there's no doubt that China will call out the United States as being hypocritical. So going forward, if the United States says something about China's straight baselines, for example, around the paracels in the South China Sea, and says that is not consistent with international law, yeah, Beijing might jump on that opportunity to say, oh, look who's talking. The United States really isn't a law-abiding power. I think that may win a few brownie points for China with some countries, maybe in the developing world and the global South, among U.S. allies. I think it depends on what particular point China is trying to make. If it's being used to justify a Chinese Coast Guard action where it's firing water cannons against the Philippines and putting in danger Filipinos, I just don't think that there will be many U.S. allied countries that would side with China in that argument.
U.S. President Donald Trump explicitly mentioned the Monroe Doctrine when talking about U.S. operations in Venezuela. That's this idea that the Western Hemisphere is the exclusive sphere of influence of the United States. You don't think we're going to see a Beijing version of the Monroe Doctrine popping up for Asia after this incident?
I'm not convinced that we're going to see China pursue anything like a Monroe Doctrine. I don't think China looks to history, at least doesn't look to U.S. history, to guide it for how it should behave to advance its own interests. China certainly draws lessons from other countries' wars, from some parts of its history. But I think that Xi Jinping thinks about strategy and protecting Chinese interests and advancing them based on his own thinking and his own ideas and his own concepts.
Well, how then might U.S. actions in Venezuela affect the U.S.-China relationship?
I think that there is still a good possibility that President Trump will meet with Xi Jinping in April in Beijing. That Trump will be hosted for a state visit, and I think that Xi Jinping will have that also in his mind as he considers how to handle the situation in Venezuela. Right now, the U.S.-China relationship is pretty much where Xi Jinping wants it to be. The United States has recognized that it is very vulnerable because China is such a dominant position on rare earth magnets and critical minerals. And the United States has seen China weaponize that dominance. And there are things that Xi Jinping wants from the United States, and we will see what they actually achieve if and when they meet in April. But I don't think that Xi Jinping wants Venezuela to get in the way of the U.S.-China relationship.